Hello, I'm Steve Foster and I'm here today to show you how to work one of the main pieces of equipment in our studio here at Source FM, and that is our mixing desk. Now it looks very complicated, lots of buttons and dials everywhere, but a lot of it you don't actually need to touch. So what I'm going to do today is run through some of the main features that will concern you when you're on the air. Starting on the left of the desk, you'll see a number of faders, that's these buttons here, which you can slide up or down. Now the ones that are marked red are for microphones, so there's a choice of 4 microphones in the studio. The one on the far left being the main presenter's fader, which is the one that you will use the most. When you raise this fader, any music playing on the speakers in the studio, the monitor speakers, will cut. It will go quiet, so there's no feedback that the listeners can hear. Also, we'll turn the red light on outside of the studio door, so that means that nobody should come into the studio when that light is on. The other 3 red faders are basically the guest's microphones, or if you have maybe a small band of some sort of studio or a solo artist, you can use those. And again, they all have to be raised each time for your listeners to hear whatever's going out on air. The next fader you come to is marked PC1. Now the PC is one of the main pieces of equipment in our studio that some presenters use, and it's also used when the studio is unattended. The screen for the PC is here, and basically what that does, it plays out a very large library of music recordings or pre-recorded programs. Also next to that is another button marked Cart, and the Cart button is to allow the playout on this area of the screen, which are things like jingles that work instantly. As soon as you push them, it could be your name, a station ident, or maybe a commercial. And again, to put those out, you simply raise the fader and you hit the start button on screen using the mouse. The next one, marked 1 and 2, are for the CD player, which is this device here. We have 2 CD players in the studio, marked 1 and 2. You can interface between them or you can run them individually. And to start them, basically you just hit a button and raise the fader. Now lots of people do their programs purely from CDs, or they do it from a mixture. If you're doing it from a mixture of various sound sources, you have a lot of options because we have what's called a mini jack lead, which is this lead here, and its own fader. Now at the moment I'm running mine from a PC on which I have my entire playlist. In fact, I have my entire music library on there. I pre-program that before I come into the studio with the tracks I'm going to play that day, and I interact with that. But you have the option also of plugging in an iPod or your iPhone with music tracks. In fact, any sort of sound source that will take that, you can actually mix that. You can also, incidentally, if you wanted to, run a USB stick into this with a program on it. We also have a good old-fashioned record deck here. In fact, we have 2, one on either side, which you can mix between, and each has its own individual fader, so you can fade from the decks as well. Various other things here which probably you might not use very much. There's a reverb, which is often used when there's live music in the studio, and this allows Studio 2, our second studio, to come on air. The green fader on the end is something you might well use, particularly if you have a guest on the telephone. This is our telephone fader. So we have a studio phone which a guest can call in on, or you can call a guest. You can speak to them off air, but again, when you want to speak to them on air, you actually raise this fader. Lots of the other buttons at the top are basically things you leave well alone. They set tone levels primarily. Sometimes you will touch the level, which you have to set up properly. And again, we'll go through that individually in a while. The other area you have to look at here is this button actually works the studio monitors, so you can hear the music you're playing or anything you're bringing into your program. But as I said at the beginning, as soon as you open the studio mic, they cut off. Therefore, you should be wearing a pair of these, a pair of studio headphones, because when the microphone is open, this enables you to hear the mix of sound, so you can actually control everything that's going out. You get the correct levels. Without these, you could be playing things you're unaware of that are actually going out on air, your listener can hear, you can't. You control the level of these headphones from here, just a simple level device. Get it to a level which you feel comfortable with. Some people have them on very loud. I tend to have them quite quiet, so I have to push my voice up louder and to be heard. Those are the main areas that you look at on the desk. And as far as controlling the sound, we have a number of other things which you will need to be concerned with. One of the things we look at is a very interesting thing called PFL, which is on these buttons here, on the rectangular buttons. Now, PFL stands for pre-fade listening. You're thinking, well, what is that? What do I do with it? Well, what you do with it is, while one piece of music or some other sound source is playing on air that your listeners can hear, you can actually listen to something else. And you're thinking, why would I need to do that? Well, one of the reasons you need to do that is, first of all, to check the level, to make sure it's loud enough, to make sure it's actually there when you need it. And it could be a piece of music, for instance, that has an instant start. The singer will start instantly. Well, you really don't want to be talking over that. So you want to make sure it's in exactly the right position. So you push the PFL button like this. You can then start the sound source that you have by just putting this on like this, for instance. So this is actually playing now while something is going out in the air. I've now familiarized myself with that. I know how long I've got before the guy sings. I know what it's going to sound like, so I know what I can do with that. You'll notice then I push the cue button. So that is waiting there. And if you want to prove it's there, you can do the same again. You can do it as many times as you like, but the most important thing is you know it's there, you know it's ready and waiting. And the same applies to virtually every sound source that you have on the desk. You can do PFL, pre-fade listening, which is a very useful way of working, very important. One of the other areas to address that is extremely important that a lot of people tend to ignore, but think of it this way. If your sound is too loud, it's going to distort. If it's not loud enough, your listeners won't hear you. And that is where you have to be very careful to set the level. Now, there's two pairs of meters here. This one is marked PFL, pre-fade listening, and this one is programmed. So that is the level that's actually going out on air, going to the transmitter from the studio. With PFL, you have a great advantage because you can do this. You can set it up prior to going on air. So if we go back to the piece of music we were looking at before, and we just play it. Now you can see one of the meters is going up at the moment, and the second one is raising now as well. And what I'm trying to do is establish how loud that piece of music is. And the ideal scenario is to have it set on about level 3 for a piece of music, and your voice just slightly higher. Now, if I turn this right back, you'll see the meters are dropping down to 0. That's too quiet. So with this red level button here, I can raise the level till about 3. So the meters will swing to a peak of about 3. When you've got that, you know it's right. So when you finish with it, you can just re-cue it and turn off the level here, so you know that when that goes on air, it's right. What you tend to do is you try to get an average. When you're setting your program up, set an average on these, make sure it's about right, and you do the same for your voice. You have a thing here, you listen to yourself through the headphones, you count down, you speak, you get your level right. That is the main thing you need to look at. Those are the main features on the desk that will concern you whilst you're on air. First of all, we're going to take a look at one of the very important channels, which is the microphone channel, which is on the red buttons. Now, it's very important that you actually have your voice level set right, and also you work the right distance from the microphone. Now, the distance you work from the microphone depends very much on what level you've got set and also the volume of your voice. My voice is fairly quiet but fairly deep, so therefore I know how to get the best effect from my voice, but I tend to work quite close to the microphones. There might be, for instance, a female voice which is quite light, therefore you might need to work even closer or bring the volume up, but you'll get to know the sort of settings that work for you. The typical sort of settings on the meters that you actually want for the voice will be about 4, slightly louder than the actual volume you actually have for the music. So I'll just go through now and set up the microphone, and you notice again I'm using the headphones because as soon as I turn the microphone channel on, all the speakers drop down. I want to hear my levels, so I'm going to set up a level for you now. So I turn to the PFL button, which is this one, and I have a look at the meters while I'm talking on the PFL side, and you'll see that it's actually fairly low. It's actually fairly low setting, so I'm going to move in a lot closer to about where I normally work and perhaps turn up the volume just a little bit, and the meters are swinging to about where I want them to be now. So that is set up for me. Once you've done that through your program, you wouldn't normally need to actually do that again. You set it once, probably leave it alone, and each time you come in the studio you will probably just automatically do that, but it's actually worth checking. But that is a very important thing to establish, is your microphone volume. We're going to take a look now at how you load a CD into our system, also how you check it's there, and also how you PFL the whole system. The CDs are loaded behind you. There's a double CD player behind us, but the CDs are actually controlled from here, which is the twin CD player. So working on the basis we have a CD already in the system, it's very much like a domestic CD that you load. You just put it in there, close the door, and then here you will have a thing indicating that the CD is loaded, and also you can select your track number. So if you look at this one, for instance, it's track 2 is loaded. Now one thing I want to do is go back to the PFL to make sure that CD2 is actually there, it's going to play on air, and it's where I want it to be. So I'll go through the same sequence as before. I will push the PFL button in, which lights up, and here is the start button for the CD player. I will push this. I can clearly hear now that it's there. I can see it's there and ready, and I'm going to just re-cue it, and that should be back at the beginning, which I can demonstrate, and I will just double check. There it is. It's where you want it. Now that CD is actually sitting there waiting for you until you want to bring it out on air. So when you're ready to bring it out on air, all you do is raise the fader here and hit the start button. That will go on air. One thing to check though is to make sure that the PFL button is not engaged, because if that's still engaged, you won't hear that going out on air. It will cut your headphones off, so it's very important. One thing you'll find very useful in the studio is on our computer we have a thing called a cart player, which basically is any preloaded soundbite that you've put on there, or it might be a radio station ID that you can fire off instantly. These are the items here on the screen. This is my cart player, so this is individual to me with my jingles that I've loaded on there. I can fire them in anytime over the top of a record, at the end of a record, or a CD, whichever sound source you can get. You can put them in. They're instant, they're queued up. One thing to remember, you can also use those on the PFL. So for instance, I'll demonstrate now what they're like when you put them on the PFL. Again, you can check they're there. 9 times out of 10 they usually are, but if you want belt and braces, you check them. So basically I would just go here, above the cart fader, push the PFL button in. I can push anyone
Steve
here.
Foster, when he grows up, he wants to work on the radio. Will
So-
his daddy let him?
There it is. That's ready. That's instant. I know that's waiting for me, and I can fire that on air. Quite simple, quite straightforward, a lot of fun to use. We'll now start looking at the PC section on this system as well. Now we're looking at the PC, and you can see from the screen it's divided into distinctive areas really. If you look at this section, this is a queue of music, items, jingles and commercials waiting to go on the air. So the queue is running this way. So number one is the next item. This is what's actually playing on air. Now the way you get these in here is simply to go through this. This is showing you, for instance, with the music section, that this is a music library. If you wanted to put a commercial up, you click here and you can just drag them into the list. You can also move them up and down the list if you want to. This section over here, as we've already shown you, is the cart player, which again is fired by touching straight off here, by clicking with the mouse. But the items in the list are controlled differently. You'll see at the top some quite familiar looking symbols actually. You would see this, for instance, on your CD player. It's flashing at the moment because it's in pause. When you actually want the item to go on air, you hit this one next, and the next item on the playlist will actually go on air or play out. Well, today we've gone through the main sound mixing desk, which I've demonstrated to you. I've demonstrated all the sound channels and also all the various devices which plug into it to give you the music and sound for your radio program. My name is Steve Foster. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration this afternoon, but in the meantime, I've got a radio program to do.
Steve Foster, his tummy's rumbling. He needs to go home for his lunch now.
I am Jeremiah Dixon, I am a Geordie boy. Glass of wine with you, sir, and the ladies I'll enjoy. Old Durham and Northumberland is measured up by my own hand. It was my fate from birth to make my mark upon the earth.